Welcome back to another episode of Tons Two Cents. Today's episode is titled The Pitfalls of Incumbency in GovCon. Today, we'll explore the traps that incumbents fall into when they assume that their status alone guarantees success, from ignoring new requirements to overconfidence and poor teaming strategies. We'll unpack why being an incumbent isn't a free pass to win and how to avoid these mistakes. I'm your host, Ton Wilson, and today I'm bringing you real world strategies to sharpen your edge in the GovCon. And our guest today is Brian Lindholm of Fed Savvy Strategies. He's a seasoned professional in the GovCon contracting sector. We've been friends for years, decades maybe, and he's the managing principal over at Fed Savvy. He brings extensive experience in business development, capture management, and competitive intelligence. Brian's career includes significant roles as a former URS corporation, now Amentum, where he honed his skills in strategic planning and market analysis. His deep understanding of the GovCon landscape makes him a valuable resource for insights into the challenges and opportunities facing incumbents in this dynamic industry. Brian, welcome to our show here today, and say hello and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you very much for having me, Todd. I'm really excited to have this discussion with you. Yeah, I guess I'm just you had a very eloquent introduction. I guess in just the greatest sense, I'm just a gigantic nerd who likes to tackle these sort of market and competitive intelligence problems for people to go after big bids. But I eat that stuff up. I love those puzzles. So this is always a type of a treat of a topic to discuss with as experienced professional as yourself.
Well, I don't know if any of our intellectuals took part in your Fad Savvy trivia night, but yes, Brian and his team over at Fad Savvy are major GovCon wonks. Everyone here, our listeners are called intellectuals. They're going to be in for a treat here today. This is jam packed with some pretty good information, which a lot of incumbents and those looking to unseat incumbents are going to find very interesting. But before we dive in to our discussion here today, you've had a very diverse and impressive career. I know you from all of your black hat and all of the great competitive intel that you put out there in industry. But you've had a career where you've navigated several highs and lows in the GovCon world. We've seen a lot that has transpired in this industry since we both have started. Can you, if you could, compare the GovCon industry to a movie or a TV show? What would it be and why?
Yeah, well, I think it's to me the obvious choice is Game of Thrones. This is the world that we both play in is there's so many parallels to Game of Thrones. I remember that I think it was like the first show or maybe the first season where Ned Stark and Cersei Lannister were walking through the garden and then Cersei says, "You play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die." Which I thought set the tone for the entire show. It also sets the tone for the world we play in. But there's high stakes, right? You go after these 8, 9 figure bids, and that may be the difference between you as a company having a good year or a bad year or a devastating year. So it gets pretty intense. I think the Game of Thrones, of course, the dying part is the loss of revenue, loss of contracts, loss of a lot of prestige even in your business. But and there's a lot of characters, right, that are there that you see the Cerseis of the world who you don't
Mm-hmm.
trust them as far as you can, throw them. You want to maybe take a shower and watch your wallet as you're in the same room with that person. You got the Tyrion Lannister who there's those underdogs, right? You don't see them coming, but they sneak in there and they pull off a Christmas miracle. That's Tyrion to a T, and then guys like Littlefinger who play people against each other and think that they're very clever, but in the end they just of course, we knew what Littlefinger's fate was at the end when what happened to him. But I think, that is what the kind of thing we're world in, and we have to use our cleverness and shrewdness to try to navigate both those characters, but also the intense plot lines that are always indicative of these gigantic pursuits. That there's a lot at stake, and they're not easy. They're very complex to work through, just like the whole plot line and how George R. R. Martin wrote all those Game of Thrones, the Song of Fire and Ice books. So I think that was probably the best analogy to GovCon that I can think of.
Yeah, no, exactly. And and I'd like to play the Khaleesi. So,
There you
you
go.
know, there you go. But I do love the Littlefinger character. That character was pretty good, and we're
He
rewatching
was.
it right now. So, it never gets old. It never gets old.
No.
So, great. Well, this actually sets up a really great foundation for us to kind of get into our first segment, which is the incumbent mindset. A lot of times, just too comfortable to compete, right? So, let's start with what I like to call the incumbent mindset. Many incumbents fall into this trap of thinking, I know better than the customer. That's not what they mean in the solicitation. My workforce and my company is irreplaceable. They love us. The platitudes go on and on and on. So, Brian, how do these assumptions kind of set incumbents up for failure? And I think you've got some examples too that you can share in certain cases where these assumptions directly impacted, the outcome.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's there is a lot of examples of how that incumbent mindset, right? I think the overarching point is read the room, right? You got to read the
Mhm.
room and understand what you get yourself into because every new competition is fundamentally new. It might have a wild deviation from the old one. It might have some slight plot twists that happen you didn't expect to see. But to read the room as the incumbent and not just assume that past is prologue, that I know better, I'm going to ignore what the RFP says. Well, no, that's called the path to a loss. And I mean, I could be here all day talking about examples of exactly this. I do a routine blog on my own site called the Deadly Sins blog. We go through and look at these wins and losses and what kind of things you can learn from this. So that's the whole idea is educate, like we're both doing here, educating people out there about what not to do so you don't become another dead body on the lengthy string of unnecessary losses, right? There was, I mean, one example was actually a competition that was back in 2020. It was a company called Ventera versus really it came down to Ventera and Semantic Bits, who later got bought by ICF. So this was a big software development contract. We got plenty of those in GovCon. It was working on the internet quality improvement and evaluation system. So a bit of a mouthful there. But what was interesting about this is CMS, and this is a little novel thing about them, is they like to do two-phase evaluations. They'll give a
Yeah.
first one. I'm sure you've seen this before, where they'll do a look at your experience. Usually it's a corporate
Hmm.
experience, kind of a narrative. And then they may go, what CMS likes to do is, I'm going to discourage you from going forward because I don't think you're quite ready for live TV.
Right.
It's the way of saying, it's not you, it's me, but it's definitely you.
It's
Um,
definitely you.
yeah, definitely
Yeah.
you. And that's what they did. So Ventera was the incumbent. And CMS said, you should sit this one out. But then,
No.
yeah. So Ventera said, nah, I'm good. I'm going to go on. So you wonder when, why on earth would the incumbent been told to sit and go away? Well, what happened in this one is that CMS was very specific. They said, I want my staffing levels for these different agile software development teams to be like this. They specified it. This is what I want to see. And then Tara said, nah, we don't need that. We're going to do
We know
something.
better.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. We know better, right? I'm the incumbent. I'm the boss. I know it's
Hmm.
right. So here's what you're going to get anyway. And CMS said, are you sure about this? Because I told you how I want you to do this. And they said, nah, I don't want to do that. So, of course, they lost. And they lost by a big, big margin. They got curb
Yeah.
stomped. Um, and then, of course, they protested. I know that was a shocker. It's a shocker they protested. So then they protested a lot of parts about the competition. But what the protest revealed was what they, as the incumbent, did wrong, right? What they, as the incumbent, the
Hmm.
traps they fell into, right? The traps they fell into was, like I mentioned, they looked at the requirements. Yeah, I'm not doing that. I'm going to do what I think is right.
It was
So they were
optional.
what most incumbents, well, I shouldn't say most, many incumbents, right? They go, they lean backwards. Well, this is how we've done it. They ignored the leaning forward. They don't see us as this is how I want to get it done going forward. And they just ignored it. Then they started making all sorts of other allegations that were made, like, well, your pricing is unrealistic for the other guy. Like, no, They priced it to what was told them to price. So that's what they did. There was a $30 million gap between the two bidders. That's a pretty sizable gap last time I checked. And then this is where it gets even better with the incumbency trap, right? That goes back to the incumbency problem, is that then Terra said, we don't need a transition plan at all. No transition plan whatsoever. It's a new contract. Yes, you do need a transition plan. It may be
So
an
did they
easier
ignore the
transition.
requirement, even though the requirement was in there? They're like, yeah, we're
Yeah.
good. Okay. Wow.
Yeah. They just said, we don't need a transition plan. So they were, I mean, frankly, the hubris was kind of shocking, frankly, that
Hmm.
they would just say, I don't need that. I don't need to do that either. Just like, no, the guys paying your bill say you need to do this. So unless you get them to agree to take exception there and allow exceptions, you got to follow the rules and then bid what the RFPs ask you to do. Right? I mean, they were fundamentally non-compliant with what they were asking to do, and they were even warned about that. That should have been the shot across the bow, saying, "Okay, maybe we need to really reevaluate our approach here because they just told us we're not ready." But no, no, we're fine. Just keep on going. So it was, I mean, a classic case of ignoring the RFP as the incumbent.
Hmm.
It might have been somewhat different. I don't know what the exact requirements were
Right.
beforehand. I can't comment on that intelligently. But they gave them multiple chances to fix themselves. And they just said, no, I'm fine. I'm good.
Yeah.
So
You
it
know,
was,
it
yeah,
does kind of
pretty bad,
it just kind of dumbfound me that a proposal got so far to the evaluation process that it was not
right?
responsive and not compliant. I would expect that from writers or capture or BD. But if you're the proposal person and that's all you're solely responsible for, to let
Mm-hmm.
that get that far, it kind of almost makes me wonder too, is that, like, you mentioned something about reading the room. And I think that's
Mm-hmm.
really kind of important. And sometimes reading the room and doing the right thing can be really difficult, especially when you've got some very powerful personalities or people
Yes.
in a leadership position that are leaning heavily one way that maybe the wrong way. Like on the BD capture people that I normally wouldn't have done it this way, but what am I supposed to do? I get outranked, or
Yep.
someone else above me made the decision that ultimately I didn't make. So that's I think that happens a lot more common
Oh, you're right.
than people just being negligent.
Oh, I think you're absolutely right. I think that what you've identified, those sort of those Game of Thrones political dynamics that happen inside every business. Well, not every business. Some businesses operate that way. Some are, I think, much more sane and much more respectful of each other.
Hmm.
But I think what you illustrated is it very well could have been the C-suite said, "Nah, we're not doing that." I was involved in a big capture, not related to this, where I mean the team, those guys had it locked down, huge $500 million pursuit, and they had it locked down. And the
Hmm.
C-suite just took their solutions and we're not doing that. Well, who the hell are
Yeah,
you? These guys did the capture. They did all the groundwork, and you just said, "Nah." Like, come on. So I think what you picked up on is very possible, and we'll never know necessarily.
yeah,
But right, that's where the C-suite sometimes can just say, "We know better. Ignore the
yeah.
requirements. This is what we're bidding. That's what we're going to do." Like,
We can kind of come in and
okay,
sabotage the
how'd
whole
that turn out for
process,
you?
which is unfortunate. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.